You've been told your whole life that attraction is obvious, that when a woman wants you, she'll say it, show it clearly, make it easy for you to understand. But reality doesn't work like that. A woman's attraction rarely announces itself in loud, direct ways. It moves quietly, beneath the surface, through signals most men completely overlook. And one of the strongest of those signals is touch. Not random touch, not accidental contact, but intentional, accepted, and most importantly, allowed touch. Because here's the truth most men never realize. A woman doesn't just allow physical contact based on logic. She allows it based on how her nervous system feels around you. Every time you move closer, every time your presence enters her space, her brain is running a silent evaluation. It's asking questions she may not even be aware of. Is this man safe? Is he grounded? Is he in control of himself? Or is he trying too hard, moving too fast, seeking something he hasn't earned yet? This evaluation happens instantly, before words, before reasoning, before she can even explain it to herself, and the result of that evaluation determines what she allows and what she rejects. That's why two men can behave in the exact same way, yet get completely different reactions. One reaches out and she pulls away. Another does the same and she leans in. The action didn't change, the man did. Touch is never just physical, it's emotional information transferred through the body. When your hand meets her skin, she doesn't just feel pressure or warmth, she feels intention. She feels whether you're calm or anxious, confident or uncertain, present or distracted. That's why forced touch never works. It might look the same from the outside, but internally, her body reacts completely differently. Most men fail here because they treat touch like a shortcut. They think it's a move, a technique, something you apply to get a reaction. But touch doesn't create attraction, it reveals it. It exposes what's already there beneath the surface. If there's tension, it amplifies tension. If there's comfort, it deepens comfort. If there's uncertainty, it magnifies that too. That's why understanding where she allows you to touch matters, because every area of her body represents a different level of trust, not consciously, not logically, but instinctively. Her body has boundaries that her mind doesn't always articulate, and when those boundaries start to open, it's not random, it's a progression. At the most basic level, there are areas that mean almost nothing in terms of attraction. Places like the arm or the shoulder. If she lets you touch her there, it doesn't mean she's interested. It means she doesn't see you as a threat. That's it. It's neutral ground, a testing phase. She's observing how you behave, how you carry yourself, how you respond to her presence. She's not giving you access, she's allowing proximity. And this is where many men make their first mistake. They misinterpret neutrality as interest. They think, she didn't pull away, so she must like me. But no, not pulling away is not the same as moving closer. One is tolerance, the other is desire. And confusing the two leads to everything falling apart later. Because when you move too fast based on a false signal, her body reacts immediately. She closes off, not necessarily in a dramatic way. Sometimes it's subtle, a slight shift in posture, a step back, a change in tone. But the message is clear, even if it's not spoken. You moved without being invited. Now compare that to a different scenario. Same touch, same location, but this time she doesn't just allow it, she responds to it. She leans slightly closer instead of pulling away. She maintains eye contact instead of breaking it. Her body softens instead of tensing. That's the difference between tolerated contact and accepted contact. And that difference is everything. Because once touch moves beyond neutrality, it starts to carry meaning. It becomes communication, a silent exchange that says more than words ever could. But again, it's not about the act itself, it's about the energy behind it, the timing, the restraint, the awareness. Men who lack awareness rush. They think progress means escalation. They believe moving forward physically will create attraction. But attraction doesn't grow from pressure, it grows from tension, from space, from the feeling that something could happen, not that it's being forced to happen. That's why restraint is so powerful. When you don't rush, when you don't try to take more than what's naturally given, you create a completely different experience for her. Instead of feeling like she has to protect her boundaries, she starts to relax them on her own. And that's the key difference. You're not crossing her boundaries, she's lowering them. And when that happens, everything changes. Because now touch isn't something you're initiating alone, it becomes mutual. She starts to reciprocate in small ways. Maybe it's a slight brush of her hand against yours that lingers just a second longer than necessary. Maybe it's the way she positions herself closer to you without making it obvious. Maybe it's how she doesn't move away when your proximity increases. These are not accidents, these are signals, but subtle ones, and they require patience to recognize, because they don't shout, they whisper. The problem is, most men are too focused on what they want to see. They look for clear confirmation, obvious signs, undeniable proof, but attraction rarely gives you that. Instead, it gives you patterns, reactions, small shifts in behavior that when you pay attention, tell you exactly where you stand. And this is where emotional intelligence becomes more important than any technique, because reading these signals isn't about memorizing steps, it's about being present enough to notice what's actually happening instead of projecting what you hope is happening. A woman's body never lies, it responds honestly, even when her words don't. She might be polite, she might smile, she might engage in conversation, but her physical responses will always reveal the truth, whether she's comfortable, whether she's curious, whether she's pulling away internally, even if she's staying outwardly. That's why touch is such a powerful indicator, because it bypasses the social layer. It goes straight to instinct, and instinct is where real attraction lives. But here's something even deeper that most men completely miss. The meaning of touch isn't fixed, it evolves. The same action can mean something entirely different depending on the stage of connection. Holding her hand early on might feel intrusive. Later, it might feel natural, even expected. The difference isn't the act, it's the level of trust that's been built. Trust is what opens the door to deeper levels of physical connection. Not boldness, not persistence, not pressure, just trust. And trust isn't built through words alone. It's built through consistency, through how you show up, through how you handle moments of tension, through how you respond when things don't go perfectly. Because your ability to remain calm, grounded, and in control of yourself is what makes her body relax. And when her body relaxes, it becomes more receptive, not because you did something specific in that moment, but because you created an environment where she feels safe enough to let go of control. And that's the real shift, when she no longer feels the need to guard herself around you. Because at that point, touch stops being a test and starts becoming a connection. It stops being evaluated and starts being experienced. And when that happens, the dynamic changes completely. You're no longer trying to figure out if she's interested. You can feel it. It's in the way she stays close instead of drifting away, in the way her body aligns with yours instead of angling out, in the way her responses become more fluid, more natural, less guarded. None of this is forced, none of this is scripted. It unfolds on its own when the foundation is right. And that's why trying to skip steps never works, because every level of connection builds on the one before it. If the foundation isn't there, anything you try to build on top of it will collapse, maybe not immediately, but eventually. Because attraction isn't about taking, it's about being allowed. And that allowance isn't given lightly, it's earned through presence, patience, and understanding the silent language most people ignore. Once you start seeing that language, everything changes. Not because you're doing more, but because you're finally noticing what's actually happening right in front of you.
There's a moment that most men never notice, yet it changes everything. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, and it doesn't come with a clear announcement. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, in the way her body begins to shift around you. Not away from you, but toward you. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it completely. Because attraction at this level doesn't ask for attention, it reveals itself through permission. A woman doesn't suddenly decide to trust you fully. It happens in layers, gradual openings, small allowances that seem insignificant on the surface, but carry deep meaning underneath. And each time she allows a new level of proximity, she's making a decision, not with logic, but with instinct. The first real shift begins when her reactions stop being defensive and start becoming receptive. This is where touch moves beyond neutrality. It begins to carry emotional weight. When you're close to her and she doesn't just tolerate your presence, but adjusts herself to remain within it, that's not coincidence. That's acceptance. You'll notice it in subtle ways. The distance between you doesn't feel forced anymore. Conversations flow without that underlying tension. Her posture becomes more open, less guarded, and most importantly, her responses become slower, more relaxed, as if she's no longer rushing to maintain control of the interaction. This is where physical connection starts to evolve naturally. Her hands become one of the first real indicators, not because holding hands is something extraordinary, but because of what it represents. Hands are expressive. They reveal comfort, hesitation, curiosity. When her hand stays in yours without stiffness, without that slight resistance most people try to hide, it means something deeper is happening internally. It means she's no longer evaluating every second. She's beginning to feel. And feeling changes everything. Because when a woman starts feeling instead of analyzing, her body begins to respond differently. Her movements soften, her reactions become less calculated, she becomes more present, more immersed in the moment rather than observing it from a distance. But here's where most men fail again. They mistake this opening as a signal to move ahead. They think, now is my chance to move ahead. But moving ahead without awareness breaks the very thing that created the moment in the first place. Because what allowed her to open up wasn't pressure, it was the absence of it. So when you introduce pressure too early, even subtly, her body reacts instantly, not always with rejection, but with withdrawal. She might still stay, still talk, still engage, but something changes. The openness disappears, the softness fades, and what replaces it is caution. That's why timing matters more than action. There's a rhythm to these interactions, a pace that can't be forced. When you move with that rhythm, everything feels natural. When you move against it, everything feels off, even if you can't immediately explain why. As connection deepens, her comfort with proximity extends to more sensitive areas of personal space, not in an obvious or dramatic way, but through subtle permissions, the kind that only reveal themselves if you're paying attention. For example, when she allows you to be close to her side, near her waist, without creating distance, this is no longer neutral territory. This is instinctive territory. It requires a different level of trust because it's outside her direct line of control. She can't fully monitor it the same way she can with her hands or arms. So when she accepts that presence without tension, it means her body has already decided that you're not a threat. More than that, it means she's comfortable enough to let go of a certain level of control. And control is something women don't release easily. Not because they're guarded by nature, but because their safety depends on it. So when that control starts to loosen, even slightly, it's never random. It's always a response to how you've made her feel over time. Then comes an even deeper shift, one that's less about location and more about vulnerability. Her upper body, her posture, the way she holds herself around you begins to change. She might tilt her head slightly when you're close. She might hold eye contact a little longer without breaking it. Her breathing might slow down, matching the pace of the moment instead of staying alert. These are not conscious decisions. They're automatic responses from her nervous system, signs that she's entering a state of comfort where she no longer feels the need to stay guarded. And when that happens, touch becomes something entirely different. It's no longer a question of whether it's allowed. It becomes a form of communication, a way of expressing what words don't say, a shared space where both of you are responding to each other without needing to explain anything. But even here, restraint remains the most powerful element, because the more you show that you don't need to rush, the more she feels safe to open further. The more she senses that you're not trying to take something from her, the more she's willing to give willingly. And that's where the real shift happens, when she stops reacting to you and starts moving with you. Her body language begins to mirror yours, not in an obvious forced way, but in small, natural alignments. If you lean, she leans. If you pause, she holds that pause with you. If there's silence, it no longer feels awkward, it feels shared. This is where connection moves beyond physical space into emotional synchronization. And once that synchronization is there, everything becomes effortless. You don't have to think about what to do next. You don't have to calculate your actions, because the interaction is no longer one-sided. It's mutual, it's responsive, it's alive. But even at this stage, one mistake can break everything. Neediness. The moment you start acting from a place of needing something to happen, she feels it immediately. That subtle shift in your energy, that slight urgency in your behavior, it changes the entire dynamic. Because neediness introduces pressure, and pressure brings her back into a state of awareness where she starts analyzing again instead of feeling. And once she goes back to analyzing, the openness disappears. That's why the strongest position you can hold is one of calm presence. Not passive, not distant, but grounded, steady, unaffected by whether the moment escalates or not. Because when she feels that you're not dependent on the outcome, she relaxes even more. She stops questioning your intentions. She stops protecting herself from possibilities that don't exist. And in that space, her natural responses take over. She becomes more expressive without trying, more engaged without effort, more connected without needing a reason. And this is where most men realize something important. Attraction was never about doing more. It was about doing less, but with more awareness. Less forcing, less rushing, less trying to control the outcome, and more observing, more feeling, more understanding the silent signals that are always there, waiting to be noticed. Because when you finally understand that language, you stop guessing, you stop wondering where you stand, and instead, you start seeing exactly what's happening, without a single word being said.
There comes a point where everything becomes quiet. Not silent in the sense that nothing is happening, but quiet in the sense that nothing needs to be forced anymore. No overthinking, no guessing, no trying to figure out what to do next. The tension that once felt uncertain now feels intentional, controlled, alive. This is where the deepest shift happens. Because at this level, attraction is no longer something you're trying to create. It's something she's already feeling, and her body begins to express it in ways she can't fully control. The barriers that once filtered every movement, every reaction, every response, they start to dissolve. And when those barriers drop, what remains is raw, unfiltered response. You'll notice it first in the way she stays, not just physically, but mentally. Her attention doesn't wander. She's not scanning the environment, not distracted by small interruptions. Her focus locks in on you, on the moment, on the feeling that's building without needing to be explained. Her movements slow down. That's one of the clearest signs. Because when someone is unsure, they move quickly, small adjustments, restless shifts, subtle signs of alertness. But when she feels completely at ease, those movements disappear. Everything becomes more fluid, more deliberate, more connected to the moment instead of reacting to it. Her breathing changes too. It deepens, slows, syncs with the rhythm of the interaction. And this isn't something she's aware of. It's her nervous system responding to a sense of safety combined with something stronger, anticipation. And anticipation is where desire lives, not in the action itself, but in the space just before it. That space becomes charged. You can feel it without touching, without speaking, just being there, present, aware, and steady. It's a tension that doesn't feel uncomfortable, it feels magnetic. Her body starts to lean into that tension instead of away from it. That's when you know something fundamental has changed. Because leaning in is never accidental, it's instinctive. It's her body moving toward what it wants before her mind fully processes it. And when that happens, every small detail begins to carry weight. The way her eyes soften when she looks at you, the way she holds that eye contact without breaking it first, the slight parting of her lips, not in a dramatic way, but just enough to show she's no longer holding herself tightly together. Even the smallest reactions begin to reveal something deeper. And then there's a moment, subtle but unmistakable, a moment where she allows access to something more personal, something closer to her identity, her comfort, her sense of self. Not in a way that feels calculated, but in a way that feels natural, almost effortless. This is where most men don't realize what's happening, because they're waiting for something obvious, something undeniable. But what actually happens is far more quiet than that. It's in the way she stops resisting entirely. Her body no longer questions your presence, it accepts it, fully. And when that happens, even the most sensitive forms of closeness no longer feel like boundaries being crossed. They feel like boundaries that no longer exist. One of the clearest expressions of this is how she reacts to the most personal forms of touch. Not the obvious ones, not the expected ones, but the ones tied to comfort, identity, and vulnerability. For a woman, there are certain things she doesn't let just anyone access, not because she's hiding them, but because they're extensions of how she feels internally. They're tied to her emotional state, her femininity, her sense of control. And when she allows someone into that space, it's never random. It means her body has already made a decision, not based on logic, not based on words, but based on how she feels around you. If she lets you into that level of closeness and her reaction is not neutral but responsive, that's where everything becomes clear. Because response is the key. If she leans into it, if her eyes close even for a second, if her body relaxes instead of tightening, if there's a soft exhale, a subtle shift, a moment where she stops thinking and just feels, that's not something she's choosing consciously. That's her nervous system letting go completely. And when that happens, there's nothing left to question. Because attraction at this level doesn't need confirmation. It doesn't need words. It doesn't need to be explained. It's already there, expressed through every small reaction her body gives without permission, without filter, without hesitation. This is what most men spend years trying to understand. Not the actions, not the techniques, but the meaning behind the reactions. Because once you see it, you realize something important. Nothing here was forced. Nothing was taken. Nothing was manipulated. It all happened because the conditions were right. Because she felt safe enough. Because she felt connected enough. Because your presence didn't create pressure. It removed it. And in the absence of pressure, her natural response had space to emerge. That's what makes it real. That's what makes it powerful. Because anything forced can be resisted, but something felt at this level can't be hidden. It shows itself, quietly but clearly, in the way she reacts when she no longer feels the need to hold back. And once you understand that, you stop chasing signs. You stop looking for confirmation. You stop trying to decode every little thing. Because you can feel it. And when you can feel it, there's nothing left to figure out.